Okay, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us all this afternoon. My name is Craig Brown. I'm a consultant at Trillion. I specialise with resourcing in the SAP GRC freelance market with clients across Europe and the Middle East. And it's a pleasure to be hosting this roundtable today, centred around one of probably the most talked about topics at the moment in the world of SAP, which is FUE licensing. And I'm very privileged to be joined by a number of expert panelists throughout my network, who I'm sure are as excited as I am to be leading the conversation around this topic. They all have an abundance of experience and expertise to offer to this conversation. So thank you all for joining me today. With that being said, without any further hesitation, let's invite all of our guests to make a short introduction and perhaps a small comment on why you've chosen to accept the invitation to take part in this discussion today on this important topic around FUE licensing. Cavan, perhaps you can kick us off.
Thanks for that, Craig. Yeah, Cavan, I'm EMEA Director at Turnkey. So I've been in risk and compliance for over 15 years now. I've started to lose count. I came into the SAP community about 10 years ago, and I actually worked for SAP UK as a security and GRC consultant. So I was a bit more hands-on then. And then over 6 years ago, I joined Turnkey, getting into the consulting game. And for me, the biggest reason for getting into that was actually trying to help organizations actually solve the problem. It's one thing having the solution, but then really importantly, how do you actually use that solution to solve the challenges for customers? So when I was at SAP, S/4HANA was that concept that was just starting to go out to market. So for me, that's one of the important things about trying to understand the licensing metric and how security has a massive play.
Fantastic. Thank you, Cavan. I appreciate the introduction. Can we maybe have the same question your way, Simon, as a natural progression from the Turnkey group?
Yeah, thank you, Craig. And also many thanks for inviting me to this session as well. It's an absolute pleasure to be here. So yeah, I'm also from Turnkey, but I'm the global practice lead for everything risk, security and controls. That houses our SAP heritage. So I've been working in the SAP security industry for probably nearly 25 years, just had a very easy paper round, so it doesn't show in the grey hairs or anything else. But yeah, I've been doing all sorts of different roles. I've been with Turnkey for the past 16 years, joining as an SAP security consultant in my own right, similar to Cav, getting my hands dirty, doing the implementations and working with the actual solutions. But prior to that, was at Deloitte, so written a fairly good report in my time and helped organizations to understand where those sort of audit and compliance challenges may come from. And before that, I was actually had a proper job. So I was a security architect for one of the big energy firms in the UK, and so was doing this from a client side. So at Turnkey, we're all about trying to enable security as a business enabler rather than it being a protectionist stance. So when we've been talking about the sort of FUE licensing side of things, we've been helping people understand exactly what that means for them as a commercial reality, but also how they can get the best from their investment in security and compliance activities. There's more to life than just the fear, uncertainty and doubt and compliance. So we're trying to embed that into the business strategy and see how people can actually do the right things by moving security to the left and prioritizing it in their programs rather than deferring it and hoping they don't get caught later on. So that's all that's.
Fantastic. Thank you, Simon. Can we have an introduction from yourself, Marcelo?
I was on mute. Yeah, sure, Craig. Well, it's a pleasure to be here with all of you discussing this very important topic. I have been working with SAP Authorisations and GRC over the last 15 years, and I have been lucky to have the chance to do this for some very interesting and big companies. And right now, especially on this topic of the FUE licensing, this is something that we are experiencing right now in Perfetti Melle. We are doing a migration from our several ACC systems to a central S4 so the licensing approach of SAP has changed, as we will discuss further here. And regarding the authorizations area, licensing and all of this, I have moved to this area after working a short time with other SAP topics, exactly because I think it's an area that doesn't always receive the proper attention. We have a lot of focus on functional things, on delivering, on making things work. but this part of giving the proper attention to data protection, to segregation of duties, and to costs that can come related to licensing, it's something that really I see as an opportunity for us to aggregate value to companies.
Excellent, thank you, Marcelo. Yvan, it'd be great to hear a little bit more from yourself. We had this conversation about FUE quite a long time ago, so yeah, it'd be great to have an introduction from yourself and sort of your reason for being here today, so to speak.
Yeah, hello, I am Yvan. I have nearly 20 years of experience in SAP authorizations, user management, and GRC. And as a private consultant, I had to help my clients with optimization of business processes from the segregation of duties point of view, and with building of sustainable and maintenance cost-effective roles. So this goes hand in hand with least privilege access, reduction of SOD risks, and minimization of FUE-related costs. Thank you.
Wonderful, Yvan. Thank you very much. And last but by no means least, Branko, we've had numerous conversations around this topic very early on. Actually, it'd be great to hear from your perspective. Sort of what interests you in this area and why you've chosen to contribute today.
Yes, thank you very much, Craig. It's a pleasure for me to be here. I have been working for many years as financial controller and for even more years as authorization manager and self-employed authorization consultant, mainly for big international concerns. In one of my recent migration projects, I became aware of a very interesting topic within the authorization area, license costs. I realized that S/4HANA is a gold mine for cost savings if you do it in the right time and in the right way. And yeah, let's discuss how to do it.
Excellent. I appreciate everybody for those brief introductions. It'd be great to sort of delve into the topic as best we can. I know we have limited time to discuss what we could spend a long time discussing, but just to set the stage, I suppose FUE. Most people are aware of this new licensing concept, but just to sort of set the stage, in SAP you used to be charged for the access you used. And now, that's been changed somewhat, so that you're now charged or you pay for the access that you could use, which sounds on the surface like a small semantic difference, but as we know, in reality, it has very, very far-reaching implications, not just from a cost perspective, but also sort of more conceptually from a least privileged access perspective. Now there's a financial incentive for making sure that the way that you conceptualize access is done in a way of best practice that has been established over the past few years. Now there's a financial incentive for doing that, which is a really exciting and interesting topic. There are lots of opportunities with this new licensing approach, but also lots of challenges as well. And I was hoping that we could maybe start to unpack those a little bit and just try to understand this in a little bit more detail and attack those sorts of areas that so frequently have conversations about, whether that's with clients or consultants or candidates or stakeholders in the SAP GRC space. So let's delve into that the best we can. Cavan, if you don't mind, I think we'll start with you. Perhaps you could give me a bit of a breakdown just in terms of the conversations you've had around this new licensing model in the last year or two, and sort of the biggest questions that have arisen from the people that you've worked with.
Yeah, sure. So that's a good sort of introduction, what you just gave there, Craig. So the full user equivalent that I've been speaking with clients about it's been quite confusing for customers. So whether it's on an ECC environment, whether it's on an S/4HANA, one of the early adopters, the FUE metric is quite a new concept for quite a lot of customers trying to wrap their head around. It's a license metric that is predominantly used in the RISE environment, which goes alongside compute power, server sizing, databases, etc. But the FUE metric has particular power and weighting because organizations that need these FUEs, they're thinking, well, how many do I need? Now, for organizations that are not at an enterprise level where they have a customized license essentially quoted and provided from SAP are moving them towards almost going into a t-shirt sizing. And so depending upon each of these FUEs, it depends on what t-shirt size that customer ultimately needs to buy. And in that t-shirt size, you've got a range of FUEs. Then you've got your compute power and your database storage that I've just described. So the one thing that customers aren't quite getting their head around is the fact that user assignments and user access, particular transaction codes, particular authorizations that are provided, actually have a direct impact and consequence on the number of FUEs that you need. And if you don't have the right control in that, and so you don't have the right level of access, then you can ultimately end up subscribing and buying more FUEs than you actually need. So that's from my perspective. And so organizations who are adopters on RISE with FUEs, they've gone live and they're finding, whoa, we're way above our FUE number. And SAP are coming saying, you're over license. So here is unbudgeted spend that we're expecting you to pay for to essentially buy that. So that's one of the greatest challenges that I've seen. That's it, Craig.
Yeah, no, it makes complete sense, and frequently the conversations I've been having have been retrospectively, and actually, people have become aware of the issue and then start to think, and that's why I think having this discussion and leading this discussion is an important thing to do, because if we can get ahead of the problem, then you can actually capitalize on some of the advantages and mitigate some of the problems that you were just talking about. So I think that's an excellent point, Cavan. I think it'd be pertinent to ask Simon, if you wouldn't mind sort of expanding sort of tangibly how this affects those working within the SAP environments, in particular, the GRC space and access control and IDM. So how does this licensing model tangibly affect the work that's going on in that space?
Sure, I definitely can talk about the wider ramifications, and that's one of the most important points. But before I do, I just want to build a little bit on what Cav's been saying about what the main challenges are. And what we found in our client interaction so far, it's almost a matter of trust. So you're getting a lot of people who are kind of coming up with sort of unsubstantiated quotes, who are being almost not blackmailed, but encouraged, incentivized by the SAP account execs or whomever to try and say, well, the right option is RISE and here's why, and just give me your information and we'll sort you out a deal. So by giving SAP that kind of trust and the leverage by here's what we've currently got, you're almost giving away the starting point for negotiations with your current compliance exposure. That doesn't necessarily take into account any opportunity to remediate down to a lower level or to target exactly what you want to do. It's almost taken as a fait accompli that you're going to move to RISE or else, and the or else is a kind of compliance audit or a pariah status in the SAP ecosystem where you're going to miss out on all of these other features and benefits. So one of the things that we're trying to help to do is to try and improve that level of trust and integrity within that process, allow clients to understand that there are alternative options. Don't get me wrong, the SAP, now it's not RISE anymore, but it's the SAP Business Suite on HANA Private Cloud Edition, I think, is very much the right answer for most organizations, as is the new public cloud offering. But it's not right for everyone. So there will be some limitations. And just because that's the way that SAP is going doesn't mean that that's the way that you must as well. So take back control of your own destinies. Anyway, onto your question at hand. So the wider impacts of the GRC components, the identity management components, and others is a very mixed bag. So fundamentally, the FUE license metric is really focused on the core. It's focused on that S4 environment. So SAP Identity Management is, of course, been end of life and doesn't look like it's having a successor product within the SAP ecosystem right now, although there is different microservices you can use in the BTP platform and other options available. But the access control environment and the GRC stack, that's still got a life beyond 2027. So the successor product of GRC 2026 has already been announced. It's there, whether it's on the proper cloud editions like IAG with RAM and the rest of those, including ETD on the cloud, or whether you're staying in the private cloud zone of access control, process control, risk management, and the like. The license metric for those have always been different and will continue to be. So access control, for example, is licensed on the monitored users that you've got in your environment. So it's not going to be contributing to your FUE license metric in the same way. Similar with process control, that's named value users, and risk management, named value users. If you're buying the 3 lines of defense, different ones again. So what that means is that there's still as much complexity in the new world as there was in the old. And you really do need to understand exactly what you're paying for with regards to your number of core baseline foundation FUE licenses, because that will drive what you have in your infrastructure, as Cav spoke about earlier. But those add-on projects, products, modules, components may still have a very different license metric, which goes back to what they were licensed on before. And that then opens up the conversations around engine user licenses, indirect or digital access licenses, and the like, which are also very, very different to those FUE license metrics for named human users.
Yeah, I think we'll touch on some of those points maybe a little bit later, particularly as well. Lots of questions I've had around indirect access and sort of common access pitfalls. Maybe we could just talk about if there's sort of a general approach to those, or maybe actually it's one of those things that should be dealt with on a sort of case-by-case basis. But perhaps we'll move on to that in just a second. It'd be interesting to bring you into the conversation, actually, Marcelo. I appreciate, obviously, you're managing a team at Perfetti. I understand your landscape, and I guess it'd be interesting to hear from your perspective how this, the introduction of FUE has sort of impacted you, and sort of the real world cost implications of having sort of higher access roles than would be ideal, and sort of, you know, how difficult is it to sort of strategize retrospectively as opposed to, you know, having a bit of a roadmap and a run up to you know, how to combat this new licensing model.
Right. Yes. So the main lesson that we have learned from this is, first of all, was the change of the licensing model, because we had separate ECC systems around the world, and now we are migrating to a central S4 solution, and we were used to the usual named licenses. So when doing the migration to S4, on the migration project, you have some needs that you will not need along the usage of the system on a long-term perspective, let's say. But then some of the lessons learned that we have with this is that during the migration, during the understanding how to deal with the new S4 system based on the FUE applications, not only based on transactions and all of this. So we have provided more access to users than we should have on the long term. And then dealing with all of this, understanding correctly how it affects the FUE instead of the old licensing model, and getting organized with all of this, and especially not starting from the first day already with the properly limited licenses, let's say, but having, after the go live of our first delivery, having to rethink it and restructure our authorizations and convince users that maybe the way that they had these authorizations provided, it would need to be changed. So I think that it's been the main challenge that we are facing right now. So the change of the old model to the new model would be one of the things, and then dealing with these authorizations that maybe on the beginning you need for data migration, for understanding, but that after some time you should have a better control on this. I can tell you that this is the step that we are dealing with right now, and doing these activities to clean things up and bring everything back to place.
Thank you for that, Marcelo. I'd be interested to bring Yvan and Branko in at this stage. Actually, again, both, you know, consultants with lots and lots of years of experience working within this space. So it'd be interesting to hear your perspectives from a very hands-on, angle. You know, are there, in your experience, you know, very tangible hands-on ways of reducing costs significantly within this new environment? And, you know, what are the sort of unnecessary access risks that lead to inflated FUE counts from your hands-on experience? Perhaps we'll start with Yvan, and then Branko can contribute as well.
Well, basically, keeping the FUE as low as possible, you need to go into 3 directions. The first one is, I would say, organizational. Basically, you should convince the customer to centralize as much access with the most expensive categories to a limited number of users, and not to give it or spread it across the whole population of users you have in the system. So because and I think it's one of the questions in question and answers in the FUE, you have 4 categories of users. It's developers. It means the users that have the development access, and these are counted 2 FUE per user. Then you have advanced users, which they are counted 1 license per a user, and this covers finance, HR, procurement, and administration. That's the system things like SE38, SM30, SM31, things like user management, things like that. And then you have the core use, which is 1/5 of the FUE per user, and then the self-service, where is everything that goes to display any type of approval and any self-service for the like time attendance things and the self-service portals. Basically, that's the name that this level inherited. So basically, if you have the purchasing access counted 1 FUE per user, and you give the possibility to create a purchase order to 50% of your users, you will spend a fortune on it. So these types of licenses, which are development and the advanced access, you should try to limit as much as possible in the number of the users you give it. The other direction you should go, it's your authorization concept, because here you define the style of roles you create, the way you manage them, the terms and actions you do for the user access reviews, role role reviews, and things like this. And the third direction is technical, and it's basically linked with the best practices of role maintenance. So things like you should avoid putting the manual authorization objects into the roles. You should properly maintain your SU24 for defaults, which is quite difficult in case of the managed applications, because they cover create, change, and display. And in display roles, you really need only the display. And yeah, basically that's it.
Excellent. So yeah, you've touched on a number of really important things from a hands-on perspective there. So having an understanding of how the FUE licensing count actually works, and also having a strong idea in terms of the authorizations concept across the organization. Branko, I know we've discussed these sorts of things a few times before, in addition to the fact that there are tools as well out there that can facilitate support in terms of approaching this. I mean, are there sort of anything you can add to sort of what Yvan just said from a very practical and hands-on perspective? What could be done to mitigate having unnecessary costs come into play when trying to navigate this new licensing model.
Let me just make a statement to the technical side that Yvan mentioned, authorization object. So when you look on the concept, then you see that some objects are expensive and some objects are not so expensive. If you take objects that are linked to finance, then it will become expensive. And if you go for objects that are related to other area, maybe logistics or display, then it's not so expensive. The problem is to identify which of the roles are expensive and which of them are not so expensive. And you see it on the objects and you see it on the activity. So beside objects, you have also activity. And if you look at the roles, even at the roles that are designed by SAP, they have a lot of stars in their activities. And an activity with a star or with an asterisk, call it what you like, might become very expensive because then all activities are included. So what we did in practice is that we had a very strong look on all these activities that have a star. And in that cases, in that maybe only one object makes the difference whether you are an professional user or a functional user. Right? And if you see that's only one object, then you go and look on the object and do I really need it in that role? And then what about the activities? I find a lot of stars. I take SU21 and I will replace the stars by values. And then I could win immediately without reorganization, without anything. I simply change a little bit the role and that's it. So you have to know a good, you have a good knowledge of the objects which are expensive and which are not. And then you can start analyzing. You can use the star report. By the way, there is a report provided by SAP that gives you some analyzing opportunities, but it is not so easy to handle. From my experience, I used Excel, and in some cases it was more useful than using the star report. But it depends on the situation. You can start, of course, with the star report from SAP, and then you will have an idea. And the other point that I want to mention is, especially with GRC, that maybe that will be also later on a topic, that we now tend to use big roles. We use not single roles, we use business roles. And this is a big bunch of authorization that you cannot simply change. You lose complete flexibility. And then you have to assign such big roles to users, and you necessarily get into expensive areas. I think that would be from my side the points that are value to mention.
Yeah, I think that's completely right, and the feedback that I get speaking to consultants and clients is that actually, like you said, putting stars works, but it doesn't necessarily always work for the business, and especially not now with the introduction of this FUE model. And that's why I think it's important to make sure you've got the right understanding, but also the right strategic partner that understands that in terms of your projects and implementations, but also the right skills and the right people that again aren't just trying to make something work, but are trying to make something work in line with the way we need to go. So yeah, I completely agree, and I appreciate that contribution, Branko. I think this is while we're sort of zooming in, so to speak, it might be a good opportunity to touch on what we said earlier around those sort of common access pitfalls. Simon, perhaps you can touch on that. The technical roles and indirect access, and there are questions that I frequently find that come up. How to sort of mitigate against those indirect access costs, whether it's document creation within FI, or maybe even on sort of on the tax side in terms of invoice creation. These things can trigger, these indirect triggers can cause increased spend. I don't know if there's a one-size-all approach to contending with that question, or maybe it is something that needs to be dealt with on a more sort of individual basis. From your experience working with clients, so how do you approach that question?
So, yeah, I mean, it's very common. We see that in every single instance of where we're being asked to support those sorts of license discussions. The history of it is where companies thought they were being very clever and trying to get around the user license metric by having a single service user that was being used to hide all sorts of external access or multiple different named user licenses. So being very clever, if you can just centralize all of that onto one robot user or one service user or a robotic process automation schema that's hidden behind the scenes, then brilliant, you only pay for one named user. Of course, SAP got wise to that, as they probably should do as well, because it's kind of unethical. But that's where the whole indirect access and engine license type components kind of came in. They are different things, by the way. So if we talk about the digital access or the indirect access, what those are for are deliberately there for that kind of robotic process automation. So it rather than looking at the transactions or the authorizations that those users hold, it looks at the outcome of what they're delivering. So as you rightly say, it could be financial transactions posted, documents imported or created. And so as you would expect, the license metric for that doesn't get tied to an FUE count or anything of the similar sort of ratios that were spoken about earlier. That's all about the output and the outcomes that you're getting from that piece of functionality. So when we're talking to clients, again, we're trying to encourage an awareness of why you've bought that and whether it needs to be tolerated in that way, because depending on your environment, you could be getting that through various different bills of materials or combinations of different use cases. So it is a relatively unique to each client situation, but the principles hold. Sort out your FUEs, which has a knock-on effect on your baseline for your t-shirt sizing. That is your core. Anything else that you're using outside of that, whether it's document posting automatically or any other add-on functionalities such as payroll, where that will be an engine license, those are additional slices of licensing that you need as an entitlement. And they will incur different license charges or additional license charges, but they'll be monitored in a different way. That's the key, that your monitoring and your auditing side of things will be different between those different license categories. FUE will always be looking on the potential. So it's the could do opportunity of where your entitlements lead you. Those other ones are still more often than not on the did do and the volumes of the outcome that has been achieved. And that's the key differentiator and the key differences. But yeah, it's still a little bit of a shark pit.
Sure, yeah, makes sense, and I appreciate you sort of zeroing on
That's
that.
for you.
Yeah, to some degree. We've zoomed in a bit. Maybe it's a good time to zoom out at this stage of the discussion. And one of the most interesting components of this is actually the fact that if you can create a compelling financial and economic argument, there is a very well, I say easy, there's a much easier business case to be made for adopting least privileged access principles. And I know that managers, and team leads have been banging the drum to implement those best practices. And actually now, from what I'm hearing and understanding, it's a lot easier to have those discussions internally, whether that's with, the C-suite, the CFOs, CISOs, those sorts of people within the business. It'd be interesting to bring Marcelo in here. I know that sort of historically speaking, it's been quite difficult to have to build a business case that broader management are receptive to. Have you found that to sort of be a challenging endeavour in the past, Marcelo? And do you sort of envisage that becoming an easier process now with a very clear cost saving attached to those principles?
I was on mute here again. Yeah, Craig. So, in fact, another thing that we have noted when we started to give the proper attention to the licensing of our S4 system is that licensing it's already something that much probably will pay for itself. So whatever you invest on properly managing your permissions to get the proper licensing and have your roles well arranged, so the investment that you do on this will much probably be paid by the amount of money that you will not spend on licenses that you are not in fact using. But in addition to this, we also cannot think about the licensing part, so managing authorizations just in terms of licensing, right? Because you have two topics here that are very closely involved on this. Of course, data protection, it needs to be always considered when dealing with authorizations, because in the end, it's not that you are reducing the authorizations of your users to reduce the amount of money that you are paying for licenses. This should be not the main objective, it's a consequence. So the main objective of handling well your authorizations should be your data protection. And in addition to this, there is also for those companies that are already using risk analysis and managing SOD conflicts and all of this. So you also need to manage well your roles, your authorizations, to avoid those things that your internal controls and external regulations that you need to reply to, they understand as a risk activity for your company, right? So I think that's the best approach. Of course, licensing alone should pay for itself, but bringing these other topics that are so closely related to this and not targeting directly the money that you are going to save with this, but giving conscience to the business areas of a company that in the end you are helping to protect data. I think this is the best approach to discuss this with business.
Thank you, Marcelo. Cavan, perhaps you can jump in here as well. I've seen you have these conversations many a time, but perhaps you could provide maybe a sort of more concrete example on cost savings that can be made in this area and how to present that as a business case.
Yeah, absolutely. So just by tackling the user assignments related to FUE, one of the organisations that we helped with ended up saving £500,000 per annum in their overall RISE licensing contract. So we haven't talked about the different user license types, but you've got self-service users, which you have 30 self-service users to 1 FUE. You've got core users of 5 to 1. Then you've got advanced, which is 1 to 1, and then you've got developer, which is 2 to 1. Now, the organisation that ended up saving all of that money, they ran the STAR report. We helped to interpret and translate that for them. And essentially, we found that they had an awful lot of advanced usage. And the reason why they had that is that the business was trying to justify it by saying, just in case, but what if our finance person needs to run this one transaction or this change once per year? Just ask that question of how much is this just in case access actually costing us as a business? And should we not have better risk response to this and better control in the access governance by doing that? So if you can figure out a way of challenging the business, but also challenging leadership as well as audit about we can save money by trying to bring down the amount of advanced users or core users into self-service by wrapping around the right process and controls in governance, you can save yourself an awful lot of money. And that's what one of the organizations had. It took a 5-minute conversation with the CFO to essentially position this, and he got sign off to do that sort of least privilege project for over time to be able to save significant amounts of money for the organization.
It's nice to hear, I guess, a positive angle as well around this, and that's something that I think is really important to remember. You know, FUE licensing has come in, there's potential for that to cause massive problems. And I think there's an element of fear and uncertainty which you get when new things happen. You know, it's sort of one of those things you'd expect. But I actually think it's really important to also understand the flip side of that narrative, which is actually, you know, least privilege access isn't just a compliance goal anymore, and it can actually be a strategy with a real ROI. And I think you've just demonstrated that in the example you set out, Cavan, and I think it's important to remember that. Whilst you know we're still with you, perhaps you could sort of touch on the importance of solution design and teams with FUE in mind. I mean, I work with freelancers all over Europe, and more from a team perspective, it's a prerequisite that people understand this new licensing model. It's not a nice to have, it's a must have skill. And actually the ones that are the candidates we work with that do the best across numerous clients are the ones that really can get their teeth into this topic and understand the implications on the business, especially from a cost perspective. How important is it from your experience working with clients that solutions are designed with FUE at the centre of those discussions?
Well, I think you touched upon it, saying that there's a positive angle to it. We've seen that SAP security managers and GRC managers have had to sort of take on an awful lot of capability and skills around FUE access. Then you've got, as Simon was touching upon before, the indirect, and all of a sudden security managers have to try and engage with audit, engage with the business, understand the processes, actually understand technically how to do it. But now by putting FUE at the core of the design, it's giving you license at this point to be able to go designing by least privilege, so assigning access for somebody to do their job and no more. So removing this just in case access is actually going to have a direct cost saving consequence. Now in security, we often talk about the negative and it's protecting and all of that, and risk management. For the first time that I can remember, it's now got that cost saving implication. I know that, so it might be worthwhile actually bringing in Simon from one of the examples around what he's done with one of the organizations around FUE. But that for me is the putting FUE at that core. We finally have that positive spin where security managers have had to understand how the business operates anyway. But now we're going, providing them a license to go and challenge back to the customer to go, do we really need to do that? It's going to cost us more money than we actually budgeted.
Sure, yeah. Just bring Simon in, please. Yeah, that'd be great.
Well, we actually had a situation in literally the past 2 weeks where we were discussing with this client about an audit-focused access remediation program and a potential authorisations redesign, mainly driven through audit and compliance failings of historical natures. And it was actually exactly what you said, that the focus was always around preparing for S4 in the background. But more than that, it was always about addressing the audit findings here and now, because we can't keep tolerating this sort of permissive culture around access creep and failed audits. So a lot of it was reaction to an auditor or an external requirement. In actual fact, when we first met the CIO, we were able to position not just the access governance angle, but the cost savings and the preparation for S4 and the optimized license exposure and all of the scale out issues that we've just been discussing. And immediately you could see their heads turn around in the priority stakes. And rather than it being an audit driven, external mandated activity, this was an internally driven cost saving measure, but also a complete no-brainer, because you had to get this done as a path clearing exercise towards your transition to S4. So it still had all the protectionist business case values about keeping the lights on, making sure that the systems were still keeping contemporary, but it had a much more business focused angle around saving money both now and in the future on an annual basis, and still meeting those audit compliance requirements through the way. But the main pivot point was that previously it was audit first and a little bit of internal business value second. This did a complete reverse, and it became an internally driven, internally sponsored event. By the way, you could also tag it onto the S4 program if it wasn't an audit finding, because it's a path clearing activity to transition to S4. Came out of CapEx budgets, not OpEx. Makes life a lot easier for a lot of organizations as well. So that pivot point about getting the FUEs right first time, being proactive on it, really helped to solidify the answer.
For sure. I think we're going to very shortly move to a couple of the questions that were asked throughout. Apologies for not getting to them straight away. I think sometimes it helps to have a little bit of structure, more of a structured discussion, and then we can touch on those questions at the end. I'll just ask all the panelists to have a read through those and see if there's any they'd like to tackle. In the meantime, I think Branko just put a very interesting point onto the chat, and actually this is a question that we were asked ahead of going live, so it's quite a nice transition. So Branko, you've just written that actually tracking and tracing revealed that in some cases some users did not use 90% of their roles, which is quite a large statistic, as I'm sure you can see. Be good to to touch on that, and the question that I get asked a lot from a skills perspective is, how important is it when you're changing the way that we approach role design that we bring people with us? And I appreciate from your career and experience, you've operated in a very functional capacity between technical teams and end users. And how have you sort of, navigated that change in terms of redesigning what level of access is required? And perhaps you can expand a little bit on the point that you made in the chat.
In the past, many in the practice you use reference users. That means copy the roles from, and this accumulates roles more and more. And after a while, you come to a status that if you make a tracing of which transaction was used by a certain user or which roles has been used by a certain user, you can do this by a certain transaction. Then you can analyze this, and you will be very astonished. In some cases, it was more than 90%, say from my experience, for some users that the roles that they did not even use. And they can of course argue, yeah, I use this once a year for closing of books or whatever. But I can then tell him, yeah, but then use the firefighter, use some solutions for which you do not pay for what you do not use.
Thank you, Branko. I've just seen a question that's come through that I think would be one to put Simon's way. So I apologise, I'm going to put you on the spot here. But I've seen that somebody's asked, can SAP GRC access control help in arriving at the right FUE numbers? I've actually heard this question come up a few times before. I don't know if you could shed some light on this one for us.
Yeah, so it certainly can. There are multiple sources that can help. So I think we've mentioned the STAR report, the Object Analyzer report. If you haven't already looked at that, that's a really, really good, helpful tool. So it's available in an SAP note, which I'm sure we'll follow up with. It starts with a 3, ends in an 8 and a 2, but I'm not that sad to remember the actual SAP note number. It's 3113382. Anyway, moving swiftly on. That will give you access to the Object Analyzer reports. That gives you the breakdown of where and how those permissions are being checked. And within that, it's actually got a file which gives you all of the permission levels. So that's really good. That's an Excel format or a text file format, but that's not going to suddenly change your world. Putting that into an SAP GRC rule set or something of that nature, of course, will then start giving you that capability to start reporting on it as a single function risk if you wanted to. We are obviously wanting to try and make use of the action usage reports to try and create an alternative reality of how can you tell who's actually accessed this for the purposes of remediation. So that's obviously another couple of steps on in the maturity curve. But of course, if you've got the Object Analyzer report and you have got that rule set or those permission combinations factored into an access control rule set, then you can start to identify where some of those opportunities arise. So yeah, it definitely can help, but it's not quite enough if you don't do anything with it.
Thank you, Simon. I appreciate that. I think that'll be appreciated from the comments as well. Cavan, I saw a question about the STAR report not being readable when we're talking about sort of some of the tools that you can use to find out, sort of how stars are being utilised. Perhaps you could shed some light on that question. Is that report readable when trying to access it?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. So the STAR report is readable. You need to know what you're looking for and how to translate that information. But it's actually worthwhile understanding why that star report exists in the first place, to be honest. It's there as an alleged tool to help an organization and a customer understand the potential licensing impact of migrating from something like ECC to S/4HANA on RISE. And so this report is almost like a value-based report to go, this is what potentially you're going to have to start paying, the sizing, the FUEs that you're going to need. And that's using the data from your existing system to make that informed position. It's not always the most advantageous for the customer to take that information verbatim and then start negotiating with SAP, that's now what I need. Because if you don't have 100% confidence in your access governance structure in your existing system, so if you don't have full least privilege access, you haven't got any of this just in case access, all the data in star report is just being handed over to SAP. They take that data and go, here is your potential bill for RISE. So it doesn't have any kind of interjection point to go, but hold on, we can clean up our system by doing this migration in the first place. It doesn't factor any of that in. So it is readable, but it's quite dangerous just to be using that as the negotiation point directly with SAP.
Thank you, Cavan. I had a question come in, maybe this is one for Yvan around authorizations. I know that's sort of your specialism. In the context of increasingly sort of hybrid SAP landscapes with premise and cloud, how can organizations evolve the way that they design their authorizations concept to balance things like agility and flexibility, but also, challenges like compliance and ultimately end user experience? Are there any sort of tips from how to go about conceptualizing building that authorizations concept?
Yeah. First, I would like to mention that there are some other licensing types that are in addition to FUE or direct access or things like that, and it's usually valid for industry solutions or even HR or I don't know, could be for Ariba as well. And this is the concept of the active employees in the database, number of documents created in certain area, and so on. So not all is really related to FUE, but the experience I have with basically doing the good roles is to create the task-based single roles, and you derive them for different plans, company codes, or whatever. And basically the task-based single role, it contains all the transactions or applications that touch the same data or do the same things. So you will have the roles like manage purchase order, create purchase order, change, and things like that. And you split the roles for the maintenance part and the display part. And by this, you are making small bricks. You will then combine in the composite roles, which are position or function based. And it has several advantages. First, your tasks, which are authorized in the roles, they comply with the SOD functions you have in your GRC system. So basically, if the role contains one transaction that is SOD critical, it usually contains several of them from the same area. The other thing is that you start different level of discussions with the users or the administrators you have, because instead of talking about individual transactions or applications, you just ask, do you need to maintain this? Do you need to maintain this object? And the discussion is much easier than going through individual transactions and applications.
Sure. Thank you, Yvan. I think we have probably time for one more question. I won't pick on anybody again, but if anybody from the panel has a question they would like to field, please feel free to step in. I think we have time for just about one more. No takers.
Well, there's a couple that have interested me. There's a lot on the sort of the more technical direct access ones, where I think the answer that I gave earlier on is that those are definitely still licensable components that you need to be aware of. Understanding how you're using those sorts of components and what they're for will obviously give you that comparison about how much volume are we putting through that, therefore how much of that do we need to buy, versus using it as a direct user license with the FUE metrics. That's not necessarily a discretionary choice that you have. A lot of the time, your organizational strategy will be to make greater use of AI, greater use of technology. So the use of digital access and the efficiency gains that you get through the processing throughput will probably be more of the business driver than the actual cost of the individual licenses as a unit price. So that business driver to do the licensing on a cost per cost basis is missing the whole point about why you're trying to use that in the first place. So I think one of the questions is it going to be cheaper? Don't know, but it's certainly going to give you a huge amount more opportunities to automate your processes, and that's where you're going to get a lot more of your cost savings. So total cost of ownership may be a lot cheaper. That was the one that I picked out from the list. So apologies if I didn't introduce it, but again, that was the one that we're seeing a lot of drive for as we're taking on the new advanced technologies.
Fantastic. Thank you, Simon. I think that just about wraps us up, and I think we've done very well to keep this on schedule and to an hour. I know with these things it's very easy to spiral into different directions, so well done all round for keeping this well, relatively structured at least. If anybody has any questions sort of following the event or have asked any questions that we've not sort of directly covered, we will collate some insights from the panel and we'll share those in a follow-up document which we'll email out to all attendees after the event. So yeah, fear not, your question will be answered, whether that's if not now, definitely at a later point. And feel free to reach out afterwards if there's anything that we didn't cover specifically, and we'll do our best to signpost you in the right direction there. I guess that leaves just enough time to thank everybody for joining me for this discussion. I think it's so important to be at the forefront of this change and to start to build a narrative and control that narrative. And I really like what Simon said actually about and Cavan about being proactive and positive about this change. So yeah, thank you all for joining me. I really appreciate all of your insights, all of your experience and your expertise. So thank you, Cavan, Simon, Marcelo, Yvan and Branko for your time. It's been fantastic, and I hope to see you on the next one.